workers are fighting back to be able to continue serving the public. And the only people benefiting from these cuts is this tiny, tiny minority handful of the richest people on the planet who want to privatize these services for their private gain.
I think it was on Left Reckoning that you said that you've been focusing a lot of your work right now on supporting federal workers who are organizing against what the Trump administration is trying to do, particularly with FUN, the Federal Unionists Network, friends of the show. And so why do you think it is so important for federal workers to be organizing in this moment, and so important that you're spending a lot of your time supporting those efforts?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because one of the things that people asked about the book over the last few months was, is it still going to be relevant under Trump? And I said, yeah, it will be, because no matter who's in power, you can unionize, which is true. But I didn't actually expect it to be so immediately clear how relevant it would be, because basically the federal workers have been forced by necessity to organize on a worker-to-worker basis, because they're in unions that don't have a strong organizing tradition. They haven't, had to strike or to unionize new shops. And so there isn't like a structure from above that they could rely on to fight back. The unions are mostly pursuing a very legalistic strategy, which is fine. It's good for them to do that, but it's not going to build a type of power able to beat back Musk and Trump. And so, local union presidents and rank and file workers had to take the initiative, and they reached out to me, and because they knew that I was an EWOC and been working on exactly this type of project. Like, what do you do? How do you build mass scale worker power when you don't have a lot of resources? So this is all I've been thinking about for 4 or 5 years, and I sort of dove into supporting them on the back end. And, my wife is very mad at me because I got like no sleep for the last 2 weeks. There was a big day of action on Wednesday. And I think the reason it's important to organize is sort of obvious, is that Musk is trying to destroy them. Musk is trying to destroy the federal workforce and federal services. And he understands, and Trump understands, that the existence of strong labor unions in the federal sector is a major block on their ability to impose their reactionary agenda. So they need to terrorize the workforce into complying with their authoritarian power grab. Even if it's illegal, they can fire the heads of agencies, but they still need a workforce that is going to sort of obey orders. And if you have a union and you have workers who are organized who aren't going to necessarily go along with whatever illegal reactionary agenda is being imposed from above, well, then you need to break those unions. And if you're able to break those unions, that in turn is going to allow you, MAGA, Trump, Musk, to then have the ability to go after everybody next. And so right now they understand from above that the crucial thing they have to do is terrorize and destroy the federal unions. And then they can go after immigrants, trans people, leftists. And in turn, every employer in the country is going to try to copycat Musk now if he gets away with it. If Musk can just sort of force workers to resign and then force the half that stay to work double the work for the same pay or less, why wouldn't every company try to do that, right? And we saw the danger of that in the PATCO strike in 1981. Reagan fires federal air traffic controllers, unleashes a one-sided class war from above for the next decade. And so I think that the stakes of the federal workers' struggle for the whole labor movement are extremely high, and that it's urgent that the other unions start actually taking much more action. And it was encouraging to see folks who came out on Wednesday, for the day of action. But frankly, we need far more union support in the federal sector, but then also in the whole labor movement, to understand that federal workers are first. They're the canary in the coal mine. And so there does have to be not just sort of rhetoric around injury to one is injury to all, but putting that into practice, because the fate of the entire labor movement is really at stake right now. Trump, they're going to run over all of us unless we can stop them right now. So I do think that for all listeners and unionists out there, understand the crucial sort of stakes of the federal worker struggle. And if you want to get involved and support, the best way to do that is to just contact FUN through the website they set up, which is go.savepublicservices.com. So the website is go.savepublicservices.com. Just put your contact in there, whether you're a federal worker or not, and then you'll hear about the next steps that FUN is getting in the works to scale up a campaign that can defeat Musk.
And, since federal workers can't strike,
legally.
Yeah, can't strike legally. Although, to be honest, for many federal workers, the Trump administration would love nothing more than for us to strike so that he could have a legal basis on which to fire us. And so, given that, there's the legal problem with striking for federal workers, but then there's also the strategic problem because, there's a lot of he would love to just be able to totally eliminate as many federal workers as possible, right? And so there's a real kind of strategic problem with federal workers striking too. What avenues exist for federal workers to pressure the government into backing down from these really extreme attacks on federal workers and the people that we serve?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that you're right that the strike is not something that is sort of on the table in the immediate because it's too risky, and much more so than in other industries for the reasons you explained. I think the good news is that Musk is very vulnerable. These attacks are extremely unpopular. If you look at the recent polls that came out across the board in the last few days, just the vast majority of Americans don't support what they're doing. It's really, really remarkable, including large numbers of Republicans. And so the thing that needs to happen to win is there needs to be enough public backlash that forces Trump to essentially throw Musk to the wolves. And that's possible because, Trump is an opportunist. Trump's number one sort of goal is to preserve his control and power, much more so than any sort of deep ideological agenda. And so if there's enough public backlash, that I do think that will force them to retreat. The question then is, how do you generate that level of public backlash, especially when you can't strike? Or it doesn't seem like you can strike. There's all sorts of things that can happen. I mean, the major mechanism is you need to grab the attention of the public to shift and change the narrative. So you need to have actions that tell the community that these attacks on federal workers are attacks on everybody, right? How are you going to get your Social Security? How are you going to get your Medicare? How are you going to get your Medicaid? How are you going to have safe drinking water if there are no federal workers or if there's a decimated federal workforce? The stakes of this impact everybody. And that story is only beginning to get out there. So I think that what we need to start seeing is, obviously more big protests that can spread the word and, going on the media circle and everything. But I think probably what we're going to need is a lot of mass civil disobedience, frankly. You don't need to strike, but you can sit in, you can protest when any workers get fired. You can have sort of a Occupy/Madison 2010 type spirit, where there's all sorts of ways to sort of grab the attention of the public and to create a political crisis, even if it's not just withholding your labor. And so I do think that type of dynamic is going to be necessary to sort of pose the question directly and insistently and sharply to the American public that federal workers are fighting back to be able to continue serving the public. And the only people benefiting from these cuts is this tiny, tiny minority handful of the richest people on the planet who want to privatize these services for their private gain. And so that to my mind is the sort of path forward. And I'm optimistic, actually, despite everything, that we can win.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Go.savepublicservices.com is the website. Go.savepublicservices.com. Our Labor Council did an event on the February 19th with the Chattanooga and Knoxville Labor Councils. We did a joint press conference in Chattanooga where we spoke about some of these issues and the attacks on federal workers. And one of the things that I spoke about in my portion of the press conference was how, I kind of did the Bernie Sanders thing where I mentioned that, I don't often agree with Elon Musk, but I do agree that we need major government reform. But by that, I mean the opposite of what he does. I think we need to reinvigorate and unleash the public sector for the public good. In your mind, thinking into the future with a new administration and a new mandate, what do you think that a reinvigorated public sector and unleashed public sector could look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, The starting point it would be you have to stop starving these services. One of the really bizarre things about Musk and Trump's attacks right now about parasite class, this portrayal of this massive bloated bureaucracy is that the actual trend has been the exact opposite. If you look at the percentage of the workforce that works for the federal government, it's been declining for 40 years, right? It's just not the case that federal workers are just growing and growing at the expense of everything. They're doing the same amount of work, but for a massively increased population, and they haven't had the resources that they need to succeed. And this is always what the problem in the public sector is that when you have underfunded public services, it does become a real challenge to provide as good services as are sort of required, and that can lead to skepticism from people from below. That raises the possibility that maybe there's a better alternative in the private sector. So we need to show through practice what good public services can do. And there's plenty of examples of this. The reality is, despite all this demonization, people like getting their Social Security. People like their public schools. If you ask people if they like their public schools, they like them. And so I think we can point to the specific things that are already happening and tell those stories and show that even when an underfunded service, like, look at how powerful the VA is. How would our veterans survive, if it weren't for the support that they're given? So part of it is like just doing what is being done, but much better. And I think so part of that is the funding, and part of it is actually, frankly, is just having more union power, so that instead of these often, there is a real question of bureaucracy. I don't think that we should sort of cede entirely the terrain that the federal government is organized in the ideal way. I think it is, top down and can be unresponsive, but the best sort of force for turning these services into a more dynamic vehicle is to give unions more power, so that they can have, input from below and from the community on how to best serve, because their workers are in the best position to know how their agencies could be improved. And so I think that building union power with better funding is sort of the sweet spot for a combination to get the kind of services that we need. And, we see, in U.S. history and all across the world still what a good public service can look like. It's not, it's not like a utopian pie dream. It's just, you just need more of it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And you need to, empower the workers who do the work, and you need to make sure there's enough staff. I went through like agency by agency. OSHA has 50% less staff than it did in 1950. The NLRB's, regional offices have half as much staff as they did only 10 years ago. And so agency by agency, it's a very similar story. And so, the idea that like you said, it's huge and bloated is just not congruent with reality, so then it becomes obvious why, at so many of these agencies, you do have, there becomes more friction, right? With when you have degraded public services, and then people try to go and access those services, they feel more friction, and it takes longer, and it's frustrating, and all of that redounds to the benefit of the people who want to privatize these services or eliminate them entirely. Because if every interaction that you ever have with the IRS is just mind-numbingly irritating, then that is going to make you more antagonistic towards the government and towards the IRS, as opposed to allowing the IRS employees to make it convenient for you and to, give you clear guidance very quickly and all of this kind of stuff, and to turn things around really quickly. Well, they don't have enough staff. And with them firing so many probationary employees into tax season, I think that those kinds of frustrations are only going to amplify. And that's, the importance of putting forward an alternative vision where services are easy to use and accessible and low to no cost, all provided by well-paid federal employees who are union members, is really important in these conversations. So, Eric, really appreciate your time. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we let you go?
No, I plugged UOC, so that's workerorganizing.org. I plugged FUN, that's go.savepublicservice.org. And if folks want to get a copy of my book, you just look for We Are the Union anywhere online. It's pretty easy to get. And I hope you all like it and be in touch.
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Great. Bye.
All right, folks. We Are the Union, Eric Blanc. Check out that book if you have the time. Enjoyed that conversation. Adam, did you have any thoughts on that?
No, I really enjoyed the conversation, though, and I'm thinking about some ideas that we might could implement and how to just get more workers involved. That's the bottom line. We have to have more workers involved, and so appreciate Eric's emphasis on that question.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.